Everyone, welcome to Balancy webinar number 7. Today we are diving into the secrets of establishing a player-driven LiveOps strategy using Player Console. This webinar will be divided into 2 parts. In the first part, we will have a general discussion about the importance of segmentation and player feedback in developing your LiveOps strategy. In the second part, our special guest from Scopely, Kiran Nair, will share his experience of setting up a player console in the midcore game The Walking Dead. This webinar is brought to you by the Balancy team. And since we have a lot of newcomers here to this webinar, just to remind you, Balancy is the platform that helps to scale your LiveOps and grow LTV. You can read more about it on our website, balancy.co. I'm Julia, the head of growth at Balancy, and here's my colleague, Michael Hripin, that you know from previous webinars. Michael is the product owner and also an industry veteran who has a rich experience of working with midcore titles at such companies like Wargaming and Nexters. But of course, the most anticipated participant of this webinar is our guest from Scopely, Kiran Nair, Senior Product Manager working on the midcore title in Scopely's portfolio called The Walking Dead: Road to Survival. Kiran has been in the gaming industry for more than 7 years. He has been leading various projects of various genres. And thanks, Kiran, for joining us. And I'm curious, what makes your current project, The Walking Dead, a special chapter in your career? So can you tell us a little bit more about your project and your work?
Thanks, Ilya, for inviting me over to the webinar. Quite excited to speak today. Before I started my career in gaming, I was into BI and analytics for a good 4.5, 5 years. But I was always very much into gaming right from my university. I used to play a lot of poker. So in 2017, poker was gaining popularity in India as a sport, and I thought that was probably one of the best times to, give it a shot. So I quit my job and I was playing professionally for a couple of years full time. That's how actually I accidentally met the CEO of my gaming startup, which I joined. Like we started talking, and he was excited about my portfolio and what I was doing so far. And he wanted me to join as the founding PM of his poker startup, which was planned to launch within 6 months. So it felt like a great opportunity. I cared about the product. I was a gamer myself. Used to play a lot of poker, so felt like the right move. So I joined their team. Was there for a couple of years. We launched it and scaled it massively. And then from there on, I ended up joining another real money gaming platform in India called Mobile Premier League. Was there for a couple of years handling the platform product, which was similar to Skills, but it was set up for the Indian audience. After these experiences, I realized that gaming product was my calling. I really enjoyed working in games and developing the product. And that's when the opportunity at Scopely came over to lead one of their titles when they were trying to set up the team in India. And for me personally, I realized that like I connected more with actual gameplay loops. So this was a great opportunity to work in the free-to-play side, which was the bigger market. And so that's how I accepted the offer, and I've been there for the last couple of years now.
Thank you for the intro and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Now, let's move to our discussion. Let's talk about LiveOps, about midcore games. And I understand that LiveOps must be crucial for midcore games to achieve this typical for the genre long-term retention. And I'm very curious, Kiran, what role do in-game events and various content updates play in the Walking Dead strategy and keeping players engaged over time?
Yes, you're absolutely right, and I feel like LiveOps plays more crucial role in mid-core games because the players are more serious gamers. They want to have deeper experiences with the game, and especially in the case of Walking Dead, which is like been live since 2015. Most of these gamers have been playing the game for so long that they would have finish through the main storyline, and all the, they're aware of all the features. So LiveOps actually becomes the core loop for us to keep the players engaged. So I would say that most of our player engagement and revenue monetization comes from the events and the content updates that we keep pushing month on month. So extremely important for Walking Dead.
Mhm. Yeah, I didn't know that the project has started in 2015. That's impressive. That's a long-living project.
Yeah.
And I'm sure its live schedule is pretty intense. And if you don't mind, I will use this chance to make a little advertisement and balance about our new feature connected to this topic. So we all know that midcore live ops schedules are very saturated, very intense, and sometimes you need to work on several live ops features simultaneously. For example, one part of the team is working on a new Battle Pass edition, another part of the team is working on a new Halloween offer, and how can they develop and test these features without conflicting with each other? And this issue is solved with such approach called branching or branches. So I'm happy to tell that at Balancy we have this new feature, branches. We finally released it, and thanks to our team, thanks for our CTO, thanks to Michael. So what are branches? Branches are separate versions of your project where different features or updates are being developed in parallel. So each branch is like a copy of your main project that you can modify without affecting the rest of the project. And once the feature is complete and tested, the branch can be merged back into the main project and ensure that the main version remains stable and the development of new features is continuing. If you get curious about it, you can read more about branches on our blog, balancy.co/blog. Yeah, and that's it from me. Let's go back to Kiran and his experience with The Walking Dead. So, Kiran, I know that in your team you have a lot of various tools, a lot of different methodologies that help you organize your live ops and generate ideas. And can you share with us a little bit about how you come up with ideas for the live ops content? Where does it all start? Do you start with metrics that you collect with the analytics platform, and like you see that some metric is performing badly and you want to improve it? Is it based on the player feedback and what players want? Or maybe it is a competitor research to keep up with the market standards. Tell us more about the process.
Sure. So I think I'd take like a step back here to like explain how we think about the entire planning process, right? So it starts with, say, right now we're sitting in Q4 of this year. We start for planning for the entirety of next year, right? So we see the entire calendar and then try to figure out for the Walking Dead universe, for our game, what are the major tentpole events that we need to run, that players expect us to run, right? So things like the Easter event, then our anniversary events, Halloween, which is like extremely important for Walking Dead, as well as the Christmas event, right? So these are all examples of tentpole events that we know we are going to run for sure, right? And then we also take into account the other types of major events, which are like, for example, the war season, which experienced players really look forward to. So those also find their way into our live ops calendar planning. And then we know that every month we run some kind of special events for our players. So once we identify all these events, we put that on our calendar and we get like a bird's eye view of, hey, this is what we are looking to plan in terms of like in terms of the events for our players, right? And then I would say this kind of planning gives us about 60 to 70% of coverage. We still leave 30 to 40% of the plan open for ad hoc events, because we know like all plans are good until it hits the ground, and then we have to understand the situation and react accordingly, right? So I think a good live ops planning strategy also accounts for a good 30% buffer to change things around and introduce new events as and when needed. In terms of competitor research, I would say that each game is very, even within competitors in a space, each game is very unique in terms of the universe and the players who play the game. So we do competitor research just to understand the types of events that are used, right? To get inspiration in terms of, okay, this is a new totalizer event, like, or this is a new types of PvP event, right? So we just try to monitor that, but in terms of event design, we try to come up with uh, our own attempts, our own design which players would like. We definitely incorporate peer feedback for specific events once those events are planned, right? So it's not something like, hey, players are requesting a specific event to be launched and we will launch that event. But once we have set up the calendar and we know that, hey, these are the events we want to launch, then for when we design a specific event, we look back at the player feedback and then we see how we can incorporate those feedback and iterate and improve on the event so that players like it. We also maintain a good backlog of ad hoc events which have specific use cases. Like, for example, we want to increase the regularity in our game. We want players to log in every day for a specific time frame, or we want to boost up the monetization on specific duration, right? So for these specific use cases, we have ad hoc events which are planned, which we deploy as and when they are needed. So this accounts for the 30% of the ad hoc event planning that we do at the start. And then in terms of metrics, definitely metrics are extremely important, but I would say metrics come at a stage once we have clear visibility on what is the event that we're planning to launch. Right. So for any event, during the process of brainstorming, we discuss what metrics you can improve. And in general, I would say for any event, the performance is a function of the reach, the participation, the conversion, the pair conversion, and the average revenue per pair, right? So it's the entire performance will be a function of these four parameters. So depending on how the previous instance of the event performed and what our targets for this event are, you would say, okay, do we need to improve the reach, which is then a comms strategy, or do you want to improve the participation, which is purely the event design based on the feedback, or do you want to improve the pair conversion or the ARPU, which then goes to the monetization strategy, like how do we decide different offer types or layer those offers at different time points or surface those offers, right? So these are the metrics we take into account after we decide what events we plan to launch.
Thank you. This is very insightful. And I'm curious if, when creating this LiveOps schedule, do you always keep in mind segmentation, or are there events where you don't use segmentation? Maybe, or if you always use segmentation, how do you approach it? Like, what criteria do you use?
Great question. I mean, I don't think anyone working in the product space can deny the importance of player segmentation, particularly in live ops and games. It's important for us as well. When we think about player segmentation, I would say it influences us in three key aspects. One is we try to segment players in terms of their age in the game, right? We have different. The game has been operating for almost 8 years and 9 years now. So and most of our player base is extremely experienced in the game, but that does not mean we don't have newer players. So we try to segment players based on how long have we been playing the game. That influences our content strategy to an extent within the live ops event. So, like for example, are we designing an event for new players? Are we designing an event for older players? Right. So that age segmentation helps influence content strategy. Then we also have segmentation in terms of player spends, right? Which is again there are two types. One is the total lifetime spends, and which is basically how much players have spent across their time frame in the game. And the other thing, which is more dynamic, is called segmentation based on spend velocity, like how much they've spent in the last 28 days, right? So this type of segmentation helps us influence the offer strategy. So what kind of offers to showcase to which type of players, depending on how much they're spending in the game. And then we have third type of player segmentation, which is based on their regularity, like how often do they play the game in a given week. And this helps us influence the communication and notification strategy. So for a player who's logging in every day, what kind of comms do we need to surface to them, versus a player who's been inactive for a while, what kind of comms should be surfaced to them, right? So definitely, as you can see, it helps us in three different types of strategies if we do the segmentation correctly.
You also mentioned the importance of player feedback when answering one of the questions. And how does player feedback shape your ongoing live op strategy? And what methods do you find the most effective for collecting it and analyzing it?
Yeah, player feedback plays a very critical role. In fact, in any product which which exists to serve a particular like pain point of users. So understanding what users are talking about your product, how they're using your product is extremely critical. Even in Walking Dead, we take player feedback very seriously. There are different types of player feedback we incorporate. One would be like regular player surveys, which goes out to a wider audience, which is more of a quantitative information for us. We try to figure out trends of like how players are playing the game. So it's more broader, I would say, and more quantitative. Then we also have like analysis of the Discord and the Reddit. Basically, these are two of our main social media touch points. So we try to analyze the comments made by players there, and we like basically collate all the feedback, and then we use AI to like synthesize that and present us with insights that can help us determine some key problem. Mostly we use this to diagnose and figure out what problems users are facing more than ideation, because when players are frustrated, they go and complain on Discord and Reddit as their main touch points, right? So we try to absorb which issues are extremely important for players at the moment. So that is one other type of player feedback. And then third one, which I think we will cover in more detail in some time, is the actual player council feedback. And related to that is the one-on-one user calls that we do as product team. That is more for deep dive and qualitative insights to feed into the product backlog grooming or any kind of experimentations that we want to do in terms of the next kind of features we want to build, right? So those are very qualitative, very, very like detailed insights on which we get by talking with some key players in the game.
So actually, let's move on to the part where we explain and we share with our viewers about the player console concept, because it's a very interesting one. I'm sure it's quite new to some of our audiences. So I'm curious to hear today, first of all, what player console is, what are its benefits, how to set it up in your game. And of course, we'll be looking forward to the real stories from Kiran's practice on how implementing this player feedback influence the metrics. So, Kiran, would you be ready to present the presentation?
Yep, sure. So, yep, as we just mentioned, we're going to walk you through how we set up the player council in Walking Dead, what steps we followed, and I hope that you can take back some of these in case you want to implement a player council in the game that you're operating, right? So, just a minute. Yeah, so the agenda for this presentation is we'll first go through what player council means for us, what are the goals we have for player council and for us internally with the player council when we set this up. Then we will go through the setup process of how we actually set up the player council. Then I'll walk you through, in general, what's the ops around player council. How do we operate it on a like weekly or a monthly basis? And then I would spend some time walking through our key wins and the impact that it had on our player sentiment. Right. So, what is player council, right? In simple terms, it's just an independent group of 12 to 15 active players of the Walking Dead game. Uh, for us, they are representative of the Walking Dead player base and the game, right? And I would say it's a mix of free-to-play players, low spenders who have spent less than $100 across their lifetime, mid spenders, and heavy spenders. So we do this so that we have representation across all the different spend segments in the game, and we don't. It's not, the voice is not biased towards a particular category of players. Right now, this I've just mentioned this as the segmentation, but then once we got the applications from players, we also try to have a broader coverage in terms of like different types of players that can be represented so that we can hear all the unique voices within the game, right? And this group acts as a liaison between the players and the game team. Like, it's very difficult. Obviously, we keep track of player feedback through all the comments, and the community managers try to be active, but it's very difficult to like have an ongoing communication with the player. So we thought that this would be a great way for us to, as player council, to act as the intermediary communication partner between us and the players, because they would represent the players while talking to us as Scopely. right? And I think for us, the main objective that we had with Player Council was we wanted their help to work with the game team and improve the quality of life for players, because we felt that that was one of the main areas where we could improve the game and deliver quick wins for players. Right? So this was the entire like basic explanation of what Player Council means for us in Walking Dead. Right. In terms of goals, I think one of our major goals was to form a genuine connection with the player base and make them feel connected with the game. So it wasn't just like setting up a Discord. Like we obviously had our communities and we had community managers managing those, but we wanted to go one step beyond that and make the players feel that, hey, you know what, we genuinely want to understand what they like, what they dislike, and use those insights to improve the quality of life for the players. Which obviously involved understanding the player motivations of why they keep playing the game and frustrations in the gameplay. So we want, obviously this could only be done when we talk to these players. So we do this via group calls, and then through the group calls we get to know these players a lot more personally, which helps us set up one-on-one calls with them in future iterations, which the product team uses to like understand each player's journey independently. And what this does is it helps us, this feeds into creating the user personas within the product team, and we are trying to visualize how our players are. These one-on-one calls give us those insights to expand on this user persona and give them a face, right? And obviously helps with the secondary user research as well. Then the third goal was to get collated and organized feedback around these four things. Obviously, improving the quality of life of players, which, as I mentioned, goes into our product backlog grooming for ideas. Like get feedback on event formats, which is like, okay, whatever the existing formats are, what do they like or dislike about that, as well as brainstorm with these key players to come up with new and exciting formats which they feel players might like. Right? What better way to do that by asking the players to play the game, right? What kind of events they would like to play. Then obviously, Walking Dead is a very content-driven game, so we have a lot of fighters which come out each month. So we also wanted to get collated feedback on the fighter kits, which is basically the skill sets that the fighters have. So wanted to understand more qualitatively what they feel about certain fighters, what they like or dislike about other fighters, right? And we also thought that Player Council could help us get accurate feedback whenever we do like whenever we're launching new features. We would have a closed beta with the players, but before that we would have a private closed beta with the Player Council where they would play the game and they would try out the feature and give us very very actionable feedback and insights on what works and what doesn't work with the feature. Right. So these were our goals. And in terms of metrics, we were looking to improve player sentiment for the game. So there is a tool for us. It's called as Affogato, through which we track player sentiment across all the social media touchpoints. So we were monitoring that, and we saw that the player sentiment was at an all-time low. So we really wanted to improve that as a metric because that would help us understand whether players are happy with the game or not. We also wanted to improve the participation rate for our events. Participation rate is simply how many players participate in the event as a percentage of their monthly active users. And we also wanted to improve the organic reactivations that we saw in the game, because for us that was one key driver to grow the game in the future. Now let's talk about how we went about setting this up, right? So once we had this idea of like setting up the player council, we first had the comms going out to all the players. So we made a post on Discord. We sent like a push notification via our tool, and then we also sent in an app message, right, inviting all players to apply to be a part of the player council. Right, interested players were given a link to a questionnaire, and were asked to fill out the detailed questionnaire. Julia, if I may, request your help to showcase the questionnaire so that people can understand what kind of questions we asked.
Yes, sure. Could you please share your screen and I will add it to the stage?
Sure. Just a moment.
Mm-hmm. It is located in the present button, and then you Click
Yep.
share the screen. Okay, so now it's uploaded and I'm adding it to the stage.
Is my screen visible? The form?
Yes, now we can see everything perfectly.
Okay, so as you can see, like once the interested players clicked on the link, they were redirected to this particular form where obviously we were asking them about the details of the game, what is their account code, are they active on Discord? Like we wanted them to be active on Discord because this involved a lot of interaction with players. So we asked for the Discord user. This is just to ensure that these players are genuine and they are playing the game. Then we also wanted to understand why they were interested in joining the player council in a more descriptive way. It was they could answer it over here. We also wanted to understand from their perspective what they felt was the best thing that happened in the game while they were playing, what they liked about it, and anything that they could have done to improve it. Then we also wanted to understand what's the worst thing that's been happened in the game, and what would have been their suggestion to approach that issue instead. Right? These things we wanted to ask because again, we just didn't want any random player to be a part of the player council. We wanted players who were genuinely connected with the game, who had a very strong point of view on what good things they have experienced in the game and what are the things which they have not liked in the game, right? And then we also wanted to understand if they become a part of player council, what would be the first thing they would change to make the game better and why, what other games they play, what do they like about those games, and then just to go a bit more deeper into whether these are serious players or not, you just asked some bonus questions around certain features in the game to help. Like we asked them to describe how it worked and how would they describe it to a new player, and this is all just help us establish these participants as serious applicants and whether they can explain these things and any issues to new players, right? That was what we were trying to evaluate with these kind of questions. And also we wanted to understand on sorry, is there okay. We also wanted to understand how much time they spend playing the game. We want to make sure, obviously, they play it heavily, and what would success look like for player council, right? So these were all the detailed questions we asked. Obviously, this was a bit heavy, but we wanted it so that we get in applications from only serious players, and we can filter out whatever we thought were not genuine applications. So we got around 240 applications, which is again quite a lot. So from that, we made an initial shortlist using these filtering criteria. And then this initial shortlist of 30 players, we had the community managers interview them one-on-one. A lot of effort went into doing those calls, and then for the community manager to identify the final shortlist of players. Now, we went ahead with around 12 players, four from each player segment that I initially described. Now, why 12? Why not more or why not less? I thought the key thing here was we wanted a good spread of players, but also we knew that players would be spread across different geographies. So we might need, whenever we have a call, not everyone would be able to attend. So we wanted to have sufficiently large, but not so large that it becomes difficult to manage. So I think we brainstormed a bit, and around 10 to 12 seemed the right number for us. And then the shortlisted players were required to sign an NDA with Scope. This was extremely important because we were going to be discussing a lot of like potential future events and product roadmap items with these players. They would have early access to all this information. So we wanted them to sign an NDA so that all this information is protected and it doesn't get leaked, right? And we thought that the term could be somewhere between 6 months to 1 year, so that it's an enough time frame for them to create an impact, but also gives us an ability to refresh the player council as and when needed. There have been certain instances where we have asked the members to leave early based on their inactivity or non-compliance with certain things that we required them to do. But in general, most of the other members have been there for good 1 year. And was that we tried every month, decide to take a call on should we like refresh any members based on whether they want to leave the PC or not, right? So based on this entire setup, we finally launched the Player Council in May 2023 last year. Now, in terms of what does the operations look like for Player Council, right? We first set up a separate Discord server channel for them where these players would join specifically, and where we could discuss everything and post everything as well for future reference. And we set up a cadence of a bi-weekly call between the Player Council, community manager, and the product managers. When these calls were set up, every call was set up over two 1 hour slots to cover members from different time zones. So you would have, say a call is set up today. We'll have, say, 5 to 6 members from the Pacific time zone joining us, and then we would have the same call again with the same agenda set up tomorrow at a time where the other members in the Eastern, like Asia and other geographies, could join. Right, so this was to ensure that everyone got a chance to at least present their point of view. In terms of agenda, what do we discuss in these calls, right? So it could range anything from the past events feedbacks to future event suggestions, to discussing on like specific alpha and beta testing feedback for a new feature that we were launching, to quality of life suggestions, any other general requests in the game. But we were very careful. We didn't encourage topics related to like economy and offers and sales, because I think those were very game team driven, where we felt that we could not let the player council dictate what kind of offers we should run. So we were, whenever these topics were discussed, we would say that this is something that we would not be using this setup or this platform to discuss. If you have any feedback, you can send it separately to the game team. And once we decide the agenda, so before every call, we would circulate the agenda of what we want to discuss. So we would have certain agenda from our side, and the community manager would request the player council to communicate the agenda from their side. So then we'll collate everything, finalize the agenda for the call, and then we would have the call on a bi-weekly basis. Once the call was done and the items were discussed, we would collate all the minutes of the meeting, share the summary with action items and ETAs on the Discord channel itself, so that we keep a track of what was discussed, what was promised, and whatever we wanted to like follow up on in the next call. And after reviewing all these minutes of meetings, the product team and community team would come together and determine which of these topics required further attention or communication to the wider team, so that we would then take those discussion points and bring it to our internal product and LiveOps calls with other team members, right? So where we could expand on it further, and then have responses for the action items that we had initially decided on. All right, so a lot of information shared on how we set it up and how the operations and all work. And once we launched it in May 2023, it took some time for us to like figure out what we need to do and iterate on events and quality of life improvements. But once we started doing that, we saw some really good wins, which was spread across things like we were able to brainstorm on new event formats, which helped us drive increased player engagement. Given some examples here, not sure if you will connect with that, but these were all events which were designed, new formats which were designed taking player feedback from the player council into account, and then we saw the impact of that when we launched it. We could see the player sentiment increasing. The other thing is this again something which is specific to the game, which is called the mythic market. This is initially when it used to happen, it was not a major thing, but when we collaborated with the player council and got their inputs on how we can improve the mythic market refreshes whenever it refreshed every quarter. Those feedback help us really improve this event and excite the wider player base, because this was an opportunity for us to reduce the gap between payers and non-payers. So before the interaction with player council, we never saw of mythic market refresh like that. But once we were hearing the feedback, we realized, hey, this is an opportunity for us to connect with the wider player base and reduce the power gap between the spenders and the non-spenders. So once we started seeing it from that angle, I think it helped us drive the performance of the event much better. Then coming to the third one, which was so war is something which is the most critical feature in the game. It is like for us, it won't be the World Cup of the game, right? It's the thing which the most experienced players care about is participating in wars and winning the War of Champions as a faction. So there were a lot of, like, we've been running war for so many years, and different teams have run it, right? So but product teams keep changing, but the players who play the war remain the same. So it's very important for us to understand their experiences and their ideas around what could be done in terms of experimental configs to alter the combat experience in this feature, right? And while we could have thought of something as in brainstorming, but I think the players who have played this game for so long, they were the best placed in terms of like giving insights on what configs matter to them in terms of experiences. So we use those ideas to then experiment and iterate and figure out, okay, whether this is sticking or not, right? So it helped us a lot to iterate on the war experience for players. Then obviously, Player Council played a very critical role in the closed beta feedback on one of our features, which was Project Stardust. When we did a closed beta first with them, it helped us quickly iterate on what the experiences of the players was. They shared detailed feedback on how difficult it was, how to adjust the difficulty settings so that more players can access it. At the same time, we were able to achieve our objectives for the feature. Like it helped us quickly iterate the power progression, the power level progression curve and the other aspects of the progression curve. We could see how these players were interacting, and we could quickly adjust that to have like a more, like, impactful and more confidence when we launched the feature actually. And this also, the way we ran the closed beta, we got a lot of ideas around what would be the right go-to-market strategy for this feature, right? So a lot of insights and feedback from the Player Council helped us drive a better go-to-market strategy for the feature launch, which we did this year. And in terms of metrics impact, we saw our positive sentiment improve by around 3%, and reactivations improve by 2%. Now, these are baseline improvements; they are not like relative improvements. So, in terms of relative improvements, they are much more. But purely in terms of increasing the baseline, we did this, and this is, if you've worked in product teams, these are like really huge gains. It's very difficult to achieve that over a period of 1 year. So for us, it was a great win. And in fact, for event participation rates also improves by around 5%. Again, this is the baseline improvement. So it was a good win for us. This is some examples of the events that we launched, taking player council feedback into account. Legends of the Arena, Stellar Hunt, the Mythic Market Refresh that we talked about, as well as the very recent 9th anniversary, the community contest we did. That was again like driven by the Player Council. They were the one who gave us the idea that we should be launching a more global co-op event which everyone can participate. So we did that, and we got really great feedback when we launched this event. Just wanted to show you how the player sentiment improved. Right, so on the left, you have the data from October 22 to April 23. This was the time frame when we did not have a player council. We see that there is negative. Basically, this is a tool which tracks the social media sentiment across all touch points and gives us a score based on analyzing the individual feedback that has been left, right? So we had a 25% negative feedback rating and around 8.7% of positive, and 67% was roughly neutral. And on the right side, you see the impact on player sentiment after we launched the player council, and this is even over a longer period of time. So you can clearly see the negative sentiment has dropped considerably by around 4%, and positive sentiment has improved by around 3%, and neutral almost remained the same. Right? So overall, we did see that this entire experience of launching the player council and hearing their feedback, incorporating their feedback, and launching events based on that help us drive positive sentiment in the direction you wanted it to. And on the bottom screen, if you see, I've just set up a timeline of when we set up the player council and the different spikes that we saw whenever we launched events which were like driven by player council feedbacks and changes. So we see a lot of spikes right there where when we launched these particular feedback-driven events, and that was one of the key reasons why we saw that overall lift in positive sentiment. Yep. So that's pretty much the entire content that I wanted to cover today for you folks. I hope you all found it useful, and there's something that you can walk back with to implement that in your game.
Thank you very much, Kiran. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
this is incredible amount of work. Could you please tell us how long did it take for you to implement the whole thing from the idea to the actual setup of player console?
Great question. I think I should have also included that, but thank you for asking. I would say that we set up our team around Jan to March last year, and from around March is when we started thinking that we should be having a more direct way to get player feedback, because we realized that we didn't understand what players wanted. So somewhere around mid March is when we started thinking over it and having a broad plan in place. So from mid March to finally when we launched the game in the first week of player council in the first week of May. So it roughly took around 1.5 months for us to iterate, discuss the plan, present it to the leadership team, get feedback, iterate again, and then uh, get the NDA. I think a lot of time went into getting the right kind of NDA in place, because obviously we have one sort of NDA which we have, but we wanted it to be more custom and specific to the player console setup. So that involved discussions with the legal team and stuff like that. So that has its own time frame in a big company, right? So that I would say that took a bit more time than expected. But apart from that, I would say roughly 1.5 months is what we can expect to set this up.
That sounds awesome, by the way, because it means that many of the games with such a legacy, for which are for a long time already on the market, it could be doable. Um, and so, guys, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Just try to implement it. This is really helpful thing, as you can see from these examples. I have another question. Mm. Uh, how do you prioritize feedback now, since you have the player console? Um, the feedback from player console and from all the rest of the audience. Do you differentiate it somehow, or what's your procedure?
The way I look at it, again, a very, very great question. The way I look at it is, these feedbacks are not mutually exclusive. I think these are different types of feedback, which as a product team, you need to integrate, assimilate, and then decide what makes sense, right? So, as I said, the feedback that we get from the broader player base is very like it's not very qualitative, it's more quantitative, because we get that through surveys, and when we get that through summarizing and analyzing the comments left on different touch points, right? So it gives us a very broad direction of what players are talking about, what kind of issues they are concerned about. And then with player council we get a more detailed deep dive feedback on those specific points, right? So that helps us get a flavor, get a more personal understanding of how these players are experiencing these same problems. So we see it as very additive. Like the general feedback plus the player council feedback together gives us a very good understanding of what actually matters to players and what we can do to solve specific pain points.
Uh, could it possibly mean that with time you will look less into mass audience and hear more to your player console, because there are only 12 people, and uh, maybe it will make all other players feeling like unheard.
Uh, well, what the way we approach it is, as I said, we never say that the other feedback is not important. We, especially, we regularly send out player feedback forms to understand from a broader perspective how they're approaching it. But within we also see player council as an aspirational step for these players, right? Say like, hey, you know what? If you are like if you're a really committed player to the game, then you would be given an opportunity to join the player council, which where you would have an amplified voice and you can create a more positive impact for the community as a whole, right? So we set it up as an aspirational goal for the players as well, that in case you're a general player, obviously you can keep playing the game and keep giving your feedback, and we will obviously take that into account. But if you become a more serious player and you contribute more to the player ecosystem, then you get an opportunity to take the center stage and amplify your voice. So that we approach it like that.
Hmm. And on the next time when you were recruiting new members to Player Council, did you receive more application than the first time? Did it pay it back?
No. So of course, we are already reaching out to the same set of players, so they would have already applied once. So in terms of unique applications, we would be not getting as many, right? Because many of them would have already applied and then tried, and we've rejected that. So we would, and in fact, what we do is that we obviously had like initial shortlist, but we also had an extended shortlist which we kept internally. So we already knew what kind of players we wanted to approach if we wanted to change it up, right? So we many times we just directly approached these players and then we asked if they were still interested to join the player council, and they were more than happy. So that has worked a lot for us. We have not actually required to send the applications again multiple times.
Okay. So that was my other question. So it's not like a kind of regular campaign of recruitment for you.
Yeah.
It's like one-time thing, and you have this longer shortlist, which is serving
Right.
you well if you want to substitute someone. Okay, thank you very much. Did you maybe had a chance to notice if the feedback from player council deviates with time? Maybe they get used to it, like losing some exclusivity of being there for a year. Like, is it helpful in the same way as when it started?
Great question. And I think that is the reason why we didn't want to keep it as a permanent membership, right? Because we knew that the feedback would probably become repetitive from players over a certain period of time. So we wanted fresh perspective as well. So we do, like, once in a while we do come back to the drawing board and figure out, okay, you know what, we're not getting enough fresh eyes or fresh views or fresh perspectives on a particular problem. That's when we go out and we ourselves try to like change members to like get new voices into the player council. And then one another interesting aspect we have observed is that obviously we expect players to act in good faith, but then we've also observed that certain times certain members of the player council end up requesting for things which is beneficial for their own factions, right? And if you're not very careful about that, you could get biased. You could just feel that, hey, you know what, they are representing a PC member is saying something, maybe they're representative, but it might not be the case. So you have to do your own due diligence to actually validate whether do you see the same kind of requests across your general feedback as well, right? So you have to make sure from your side you are actively ruling out all the biases which the player council members might have, because at the end of the day, we are all humans, we all have our biases. So as much as we are aware of it actively, we can remove those biases, and then we can take a more non-biased approach and more holistic approach to the feedback.
Thank you. And the last question from me. So, as I understand, you have this like special closed beta environment for these players where they can play some upcoming updates. Yes? Okay. So, this is, does it mean that you provide your players from Player Console some game builds which are created especially for them?
Yes. So
It's
we
under NDA. You just provide them with this. Okay.
Yes. So because it's anti-NDA, we are okay to share those specific beta builds with them. We share the way they can access those beta builds for a specific duration, and then we obviously track everything there, and then we ask them to play in a certain way as well, right? We ask them to break break the game if possible, break the flow if possible, and try out everything. So that helps us get those nuances which we might have not taken care of in the initial development cycle, right? So we realized that the initial, so we in general we have a closed beta for any new feature we launch, but this with Player Console we set up one extra step of a private closed beta before we release the closed beta to players, so that the feature itself is more polished for the broader player base, and then we actually launch it to the final and the entire user base.
Got it. Understood. Thank you so much, Kiran. Maybe let's give some time for questions from our audience.
Yes, we actually have a wonderful question from Guillaume, and let me read it. So, as a community manager, how would you get the buy-in from the product or game team to get an initiative launched and organized, such as Player Console, as this would require some transparency and dedication and commitment from the side towards the player base? So, we're trying to rephrase the subject is like, if you were a community manager, Kiran, how would you persuade yourself to start a Player Console? What arguments would you use?
Very, very good question. At least in our case, it was driven by product, so we didn't have to encounter this specific situation. But if I put myself in a community manager's lens and think about this, I would basically position myself as I would position this entire thing as, hey, you know what, we exist to serve the players, right? We want to do what's like in any feature for any game, it's designed with players in mind. So I think we would get to an initial buy-in around, hey, how important is player feedback? And I would expect 100% of the product people to say that it's extremely important, because it is, right? And once we have that kind of a buy-in, then I think we should pitch in an idea of like, hey, you know what, how often are we getting the detailed qualitative feedback that product team needs? And in most cases, they don't, because we rely a lot on user research teams to get those player feedbacks and contacts with the players to do one-on-one calls. So this could be a great entry point to pitch that, you know what, why don't we set up a small sort of a player council where you can have like extremely hardcore players of the game as a unit with whom we can regularly interact and get detailed feedback on how they play the game, what they like and dislike. So when we approach it from this perspective, product team would see the value in things that are currently a gap for them, right? While they can get surveys, but they are not able to access players for one-on-one calls where they can enrich their insights. So when you present it like this, there is a stronger chance to get their buy-in. And then once you get their buy-in, then you can chart out the details of how this entire thing would work. Like what worked for us in Walking Dead might not exactly work for any other game. In fact, once we set up a player council, another game in Scopely's portfolio wanted to implement something similar. So we had multiple rounds of conversations with them where we tried to like customize it for their setup, right? And once they set it up, it was similar in terms of approach, but the exact way of working is still a bit different. So you can work with the product team. Once you have the buy-in, you can work with the product team to figure out the nuances of what will work for you and what approach is the best. And but obviously, I think NDA is a critical aspect of it, right? We have to make sure that whenever you set up a player council like this, there is something in place that protects your IP and data from leaking to the general audience before it's intended to. So I think once you approach it from this perspective, it's easier to get. I mean, if a CM approached me with this in this way, I think I would find it very difficult to say no to it.
Mm-hmm. And I think
will it increase the workload for a community manager to deal with player council?
I think it definitely does, but it's a positive. It's a workload which adds a lot of positive impact across a longer time frame, right? And it helps the community manager also showcase their impact in the game. So I think that in that ways it becomes a win-win, right? It's a right work put in for the right kind of impact.
Thank you.
awesome. Thank you for your answers. And thank you everyone for taking part in this webinar. I think we're moving up to wrapping it up. It was a pleasure to having you guys here.